Welcome to Below the Line with Dr. Bennie L. Harris. The Chancellor of the University of South Carolina Upstate talks with top leaders about issues such as change, technology, education, and leadership. Please enjoy.
I wanted to welcome you to Below the Line. Tim, I'm here with Mr. Tim Pearson. Tim is the president of Duke Energy Utilities Operations South Carolina. And I've been wanting to have this interview for some time, ever since you got appointed. And so I'm so honored and appreciative that you took the time to make time for this. So let's start from the beginning. Tim, tell me a bit about your upbringing and how it may have helped shape who you are today.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, first of all. I've wanted to do this for some time as well. I know the weather got in the way a couple times.
That's the business you're in, right?
It is the business I'm in. Hopefully, one of the things we try and do is make sure that the weather impacts everybody else, as little as possible. So actually, I was born, this I guess surprised some people. I was actually born in Sydney, Australia. My father is Australian, and my mom is from Philadelphia. My parents met at business school at the University of Virginia.
Okay.
Came from Australia to business school, and then worked for IBM. And so we moved back. They moved back, and I was born there. And then ultimately, when I was about 8 years old, he got transferred back to the U.S., and I grew up in Connecticut. So IBM is headquartered in White Plains, New York, and so that's where we were and where I grew up. I'm very lucky. I have great parents, had a great upbringing. I think, my mom taught me a lot of lessons about life, as good mothers do. But she was always very impressive to me. She was, University of Virginia is a great business school. She was one of the second or third class of women to go through there.
Wow.
And so she was always kind of pushing boundaries. And so, I think watching her, she taught me a lot about, not shying away from challenges, about hard work, about commitment. And I still think about those lessons that she taught me all the time.
I think we'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about that, because that's really impressive and exciting to hear. Tim, you began your career in federal public affairs, including working as a speechwriter, communications advisor. You served as chief of staff to Governor Nikki Haley and advisors to multiple governors before joining Duke Energy. Which early experience most shaped your leadership style, and talk to us about why?
So I think probably, when I was chief of staff to Governor Haley, in 2011, I was pretty young for the job. I think I was at that point I was 29 years old. And it was a different job. It's still, there's no job like it. Every day is so different,
Right.
But I think what I learned, and I'd gotten this piece of advice from a chief of staff to Governor Jeb Bush, and I'd asked her for some advice, and she said, in some respects, you have to treat this job, and I think this is true for a lot of leadership positions, is almost like a triage nurse. Okay. Almost everything that gets to your desk is the most important thing, that's coming from that place, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the most important thing. And it's taught me how to think about prioritization. Mm-hmm. What's coming to you that's a paper cut? What is someone who's got an arterial bleed and, they may be in some serious trouble? So I try and still think through things that way. How everything's important and we'll get to everything. Yeah. But how do we prioritize this? And what is, mission critical? What's something that, everyone needs to be focused on in solving this challenge or getting over this hump, and what can kind of wait a little bit longer and can, go on the back burner until we all have time to get there. I think that served me well in the governor's office, and I hope it served me well. Yeah.
I think with running an agency like Duke Energy that deals with so many crises is really, I'm sure it serves you well. I think I heard one chief of staff or former president say that his job as chief of staff that he only brings to the president the worst of the worst. Everything else he triage to take care of among the team. And I think you got a similar type of approach to this.
Yeah, and I'm very lucky at Duke. I mean, I have such a capable team of people that I work with that, there's a lot of things that they can handle, and I have every confidence that they can handle it. And I think letting them do that, I think is important. And also having a team that you're kind of comfortable kind of passing things on.
So let's talk about that. What motivated you to transition from decades in government and policy to a leadership role in the energy sector with Duke Energy?
A lot of things, I think. I mean, first and foremost, family was
Okay.
like kind of the driving force behind it, and the idea that I was gonna, maybe step outside of the political world. I have two young kids. My daughter's 5, my son is 2. At that point, I had one, and she was young, and I'd traveled a lot in 2022 before I joined Duke. Uh, I was doing the governor's race here with Governor McMaster, but I had races in Nevada and Michigan and New Hampshire and North Carolina. I was in DC. I just wasn't home, and so I didn't really want to do that again, especially as my daughter and now both of them got older. Um, I'd worked with Duke as a consultant for a number of years, so I knew a lot of the people, and I knew how that it was the kind of place that I would want to come to work. The mission, the purpose that folks here come to work every day with was something that I found attractive.
Okay.
One thing I liked about politics and campaigns is that there is a common mission, a common goal. It's very clear you want to win the election.
Right.
I felt like, the kind of the service mantra that exists at Duke and the desire to, do best by our customers was a mission that kind of drove everybody, at least from my observation on the outside. And then the industry itself, I mean, it's a really exciting time to be in the electric industry. It's changing probably more than it ever has. And, being part of, kind of the front lines of that and, how impactful, the decisions we're making, not just as a company, but, kind of as a society, as a nation, state, in terms of, our electric infrastructure, they'll be around for a long time. And so all of those things kind of together said, this is the right decision.
So, I think about your work and your background and all the successes you had in that capacity. So how has your experience in political strategy and public service influenced how you lead a major utility company?
It's an interesting question. I think one of the things that being in politics taught me was that distractions can be all encompassing if you let them.
Okay.
And politics is in many ways the art of distraction.
Yeah.
And I think it, for me, understanding that it is easy to get caught up in a couple of Facebook posts or, but if you can let the noise be noise, and focus on what you're really trying to achieve, I think that's not that you can't survive in politics without that, or every day will be a wasted day. And so I think that experience I've tried to translate to this. I try to stay, we're busy and lots of things come and weather comes, but what are we really here to do?
Okay.
Does this impact it? If it doesn't, let's let it go. Yeah, I think, people who are successful in politics do that very, very well, and I've tried to do it here too.
That's good. So, this was a softball question. It may be. Who were the leaders or mentors early in your career who influenced your leadership approach, and what lessons from them do you still use today?
So I've had the good fortune of being around a lot of good bosses and some less good bosses. I think you learn a lot from both, or leaders. I think one name that pops up to me. I worked before I came to South Carolina. I worked on Rudy Giuliani's presidential campaign back in 2007, and I was pretty young then, and the campaign manager at that time was a guy named Mike Duhame, and I had a couple of jobs in that. But what always struck me about Mike was how accessible he was.
Yeah.
I had come into that job in a presidential campaign. At that point, Rudy was, America's mayor and all of those things. And I didn't really have any expectation that I would get to interact with the campaign manager and that he would, I don't know, really know or care that much about me. I remember I was, we didn't get a lot of days off during that campaign. I ended up in at a restaurant at like a Jersey Shore. It was based out of New York, a Jersey Shore restaurant. He happened to be there, and um, I didn't even know. Said hello, whatever. He ended up, paying for our bill. Not even saying anything. Things like that. It meant a lot to me. I was 24, 25, something like that. Um, and it's always stuck with me. So I tried. I think I try to be accessible to people. I think that um, it's important as a leader that folks see you and hear from you, um, and that they know that they can come to you, and that you're not this person or some title. That's always stuck with me, and I've tried to keep it in all the different
Yeah, I
jobs.
think that's impressive and important. Can you share a personal leadership challenge, maybe from the campaign work or government service, that taught you an important lesson about leading through uncertainty?
So the toughest time that I ever had, and it's still to this day in any job, was when I was working for Governor Haley, and there was the shootings at Mother Emanuel in Charleston. And I'll never forget that. I mean, at night, and then I flew down with Nikki to Charleston the next morning, and we were there. I think it was a Wednesday night. On Thursday, we were down there all day Thursday, and then most of the day Friday, and then we came back to Columbia, and it was obviously a very intense and horrifying and draining period of time. And I remember getting back to the governor's office on that Friday, and there was only 3 or 4 of us who had been down in Charleston, and everyone else was back at the office, and they were just kind of in shock, um, and we had kind of been in it, and it was clear to me. And then Nikki and myself, and we went and we sat with the whole staff for like a couple hours. I recall just kind of talking to them, because, and I know all we wanted to do was go home. I know she'd had a very draining couple of days, but while we'd been in there like living that, they'd been in Columbia living it as well. And Senator Pinckney was someone that they knew and had worked with, and so to me, that communication, and that it is easy in times of crises to get very caught up in like what's right in front of you, but I think it's really important to remember that there are a lot of people involved in that too. And just because they may not be involved in every single conversation doesn't mean they don't care about everything that's going on. And so the idea that, communicating and bringing people in to what's going on in times of challenge, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think I've listened to a lot of wonderful lessons that you've shared just in this short conversation.
Yeah.
About leadership. So let's talk about Duke Energy. How do you define your vision for Duke Energy's role in shaping South Carolina's energy future, especially in a state that's trying to balance reliability, affordability, and sustainability? How do you see Duke Energy playing into all of that? Your vision for that?
It's interesting you list those 3 things, because that's affordability, reliability, that's the balance, right?
Right.
Always the balance. And I think, my vision for South Carolina's energy future is that, we serve our customers well, and provide them value, and they feel that.
Okay.
And that's a lot of different things. The electric grid is complicated. There are 1,000 parts of the way, far more complicated than I could explain or even understand in many regards. But a lot of times people do not really think. I was like this before I joined Duke. They don't focus on electricity until it's not there. Right.
Mhm.
And they don't, and it's not a think about it this way. If I'm watching Amazon Prime with my wife and the ads are on, and it's bothering us, I can pay $5 extra a month, and those ads go away, and I see that. I have decided that was worth it, and I can see it, and there's tangible benefit. And when people's electric bills go, if their lights aren't brighter,
Right.
we know that they're on more often, because that's what we're investing in, but it doesn't feel any different. So my vision is that we're smarter about it. We are we're investing in the right assets that will last for a long time. So sustainability, as you mentioned, is important, but that people feel the value that we provide. Because I think it's really important for our customers. If you step back, there's so much of what we do in the modern world that's enabled by electricity, but we need people to feel that, and I think that would be kind of the perfect.
Yeah. I do want to say this. This is not a commercial for you all, but I do value the communications I get that reminds me that I'm consuming energy.
Yeah.
It's easy. This is how much consumption you did. This is how you have decreased your consumption. And that constant communication I get in email in a visual way is just really a nice touch to keep me connected that the lights are on.
Well, I'm glad.
Or shining brighter.
Because that word connected is a really important thing
Yeah.
for us. Again, it's it's just it's not as tangible. And so I'm glad you feel that we are constantly thinking of ways to provide information to our customers in a way that helps them understand,
Yeah.
why things are happening, what it means for them, what are the things that we're doing to try and put downward pressure on their rates. And I think that, ultimately we want every one of our customers to do
Yeah.
that.
Thank you. So what core leadership philosophies guide you in navigating change in a highly regulated, highly politically sensitive utility industry? What are the core leadership philosophies that guide you?
I think anytime you're dealing with change, you have to be very definitive about what your goals are, what your values are, and then you have to be committed to them. It kind of goes back to what I was talking about a little bit before about not getting distracted by the noise. It's the same idea, although, changing political realities, changing regulating bodies, laws that govern them, obviously, are a lot more than noise. But to me, as long as you stay true to what you're trying to accomplish, you can figure out how new paradigms, you may have to change the way you get there. You don't have to change what you're really trying to do. And so as long as you're committed to this idea of, for us, we want to provide the most reliable, affordable power that we can. We never want anyone to flip that light switch and it not go on. And we don't want to burden them, with costs that are unnecessary. If we stay true to that, there are ways, whatever the regulatory structure is, whatever the political environment is, that we can achieve those goals. And so as long as you're true to that, you can navigate almost anything.
Yeah. So there's a lot of pressure on the utility industry today. A lot of different expectations. So how do you balance sometimes competing expectations of regulators, customers, community leaders when making very strategic decisions?
Yeah, that's the great challenge of our time and our business. Yeah, I think my first answer to that would be you figure out where you can get alignment, right?
Yeah.
So like the low hanging fruit, so to speak, would be where what the regulators or expectations are and what the customers and what the stakeholders are, they align, and then I think you drive really hard and fast through those places. When they're not in alignment, I think you go back to what's at the core of what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
And when we have to make trade-offs, when that balance has to go a little out of whack, are we doing it? Are we making the decisions that ultimately achieve those goals? And if the answer to that is, no, then we probably need to reevaluate what we're doing.
Okay. What leadership strategies do you employ to foster innovation across Duke Energy's operation, particularly around grid modernization and new energy technology?
I think something that's important to me, and this may sound a little bit strange because we're talking about a regulated utility that operates nuclear plants, but I think you have to foster a culture where appropriate risk taking is not just okay, but encouraged.
Yeah.
And certainly, and I want to be careful and make sure folks understand what I mean. We should not be taking risks at our nuclear plants, right? There are certain places where our gas plants or we shouldn't be taking risks with anybody's safety, our teammates or anyone in the public. So there are places where risks are non-negotiable or risk preservation. But what I mean by that is, new ideas are good, and some of them don't always work out, but that should be encouraged. We should create a culture where, you know, challenging assumptions is rewarded. I think, and thinking outside of the box is something that we encourage, and that people should feel comfortable, taking risks. It's a risk to come up with a new idea. It's a risk to push back on, your supervisor. There are times where that's appropriate, and I think in a time where you have to, where we have all of this new infrastructure that's necessary, and we're trying to balance that with, cost pressures on our customers. We have to, try new things. We have to embrace new technologies, and we have to do it in a way that is an appropriate risk. But I think ultimately fostering a culture where folks are comfortable thinking a little bit differently is the only way that we kind of move forward.
Okay. Severe weather events like Hurricane Helene deeply impacted Duke Energy's service area. How have these experiences influenced your approach to resilience leadership and crisis preparedness?
So in the last one, you can't successfully get through events like that if you're not appropriately prepared.
Yeah.
I think Duke, this will be somewhat my answer to both parts of that question. I'm blessed to work with some incredible people.
Yeah.
And so the level of preparedness that we have for those kind of incidents is just, it's mind-boggling. And I think one of the times we were supposed to have this conversation, there was that predicted ice storm coming through. I think we had something like 18,000 line workers stationed around North and South Carolina, in preparation for that. Now, ultimately, we didn't need them, and that was a wonderful thing. But so you have to prepare, and I think that the folks at Duke who are responsible for that are exceptionally good and especially thoughtful about how they do that. I think, for me, I've learned I can't control everything.
Right.
You have to trust the people that you work with. Again, I'm blessed that those are the folks that I work with are certainly deserving of that trust. But you have to set the tone for what, again, you're trying to accomplish, and then let people work without interference.
Yeah.
You prioritize safety, and then beyond that, you let people kind of do their job. Because if you start meddling with too much, you're only going to slow it down. And I think there's a real kind of impetus to do that, right? Things are bad. I need to get in there. But I think you ultimately do more harm than good. So I think trusting your folks is just kind of the key to that.
Yeah, I think that's important. Community engagement is a big part of your portfolio. How does your leadership philosophy shape Duke Energy's approach to earn the public trust and fostering meaningful engagement?
So I think what Duke does very well in this, and again, the credit is all to the folks who do it, is, they're not showing up, once a year and saying, hey, we're here, at a, annual chamber banquet.
Right.
Like, we live in these communities. They're our homes. We raise our families in these communities. Our kids go to school. So, first and foremost, we're part of these communities. And I know, and I think that's critical.
Yeah.
Right. So we're not showing up and engaging. It's not like we're just there when we need something. Right?
So, as you think about those responses, how do you, as the leader, communicate that and model that for all levels of the organization among your employees to know that community engagement is critically important of who you are as an organization?
Yeah. Well, I think that we don't. At Duke, generally, the focus is consistently on our customers, and the reality is that because of the way that we're structured, everyone in our communities is also our customer.
Yeah.
Right. And so we don't, when we have big corporate events, we start with a customer moment. That is somebody coming up and telling a story about how they interacted interacted with a customer that ultimately made their life better. That happens, from our, huge quarterly meetings that the entire company is all the way down the line. And I think that's really important because ultimately what it does is it sets the tone that, the customer is why we are here. The customer in that community, is why we are here. And so I think when that tone is set at the very top, it trickles down very naturally.
Yeah. Yeah. So I lead a university that we have about 5,200 students and 1,100 employees, full-time, part-time, et cetera. And ethical leadership is something that's critical and important to me. So what ethical challenges have you encountered in your role, and how have you navigated them while staying true to your values and the organization's mission?
I would start by saying I'm pretty fortunate, in the sense that I haven't really had to deal with it at Duke too many, ethical or serious, ethical, um, challenges because I work with a very ethical group of people. Now I come from politics, so that might have been a little bit different when I was in that world. I think that when you're dealing with those kind of challenges, you have to be comfortable with who you are. I think you have to be true to the values that you have set for yourself and for your team and for your colleagues, for your organization. And I think you have to be kind of inflexible on those things. There's always circumstances that, when folks get in trouble or whatever. But if something's happening on that violates the core values of who you are and who you want your organization to be, I don't think there's room for flexibility.
Yeah.
Because if you are willing to let those kind of lapses slide, then they aren't actually core values.
Yeah.
And then I think you get yourself in trouble. So to me, it's just understanding, who you are, what your organization is, what you want it to be. There are a few things that will be defining for that. Set them for yourself. And I think you got to be true to those things, irrespective of if it's your best friend, or I just, if you cross those things, if you let that slide, everyone will see it, everyone will know. And ultimately they no longer will be the values that anybody else, believes in either.
Yeah. Thank you. Tim, when I used to apply for a job as an undergraduate, I would get the question, tell me your weaknesses, your strength. And I always found it hard to talk about what your weaknesses are, et cetera. But as I grew and have taken on more responsibility, I've learned to be much more reflective of my behavior, my leadership. So can you share a leadership failure or a tough decision you made that taught you something fundamental about effective leadership?
Yeah, I'm trying to. So many. Which one to pick? I think some of them are. Here's an example I can think of. Early on, when Governor Haley became governor, Darla Moore was on the board of the University of South Carolina, and it was the governor's only appointment on that board, and they didn't really know each other, and so the governor appointed someone else in her place, which became a very big deal. She had been a very big benefactor to the university. Front page news, marches on the State House, kind of big deal. And it was kind of my job at that time to make sure that she didn't do things that would create that kind of response. Some things you can't control, but that one was all voluntary. She could have done a lot of different things. And reflecting on that, so I consider that a mistake or a failure of my job. And think in looking back on that, the decision-making circle that did that was very insular.
Yeah.
There were not very many of us involved in that, and it was just kind of like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. And I think, upon reflection, I don't know that that was the wrong decision. How we did it was probably not the most effective way, and not kind of stepping outside of like that closed circle, I think stopped us, did not give us the ability to kind of see the whole board. And so something that I've always tried to do and that I learned from that was that, you have to be willing to listen to people who have different ideas and different thoughts. And when you're making big decisions, don't be afraid. You got to check them, and check them not with the same people that you come up with them with, because you can get into a place where you're so far down the road of the decision, you stop seeing some of the, kind of the roadblocks, speed bumps, whatever you want to call it. And so that's one that I think back to. I'm like, we probably would have done that differently. I don't know that the outcome would have been different. And if we just maybe tested it or listened to more voices.
Yeah. Actually, I think about leadership being a very inclusive process.
Yeah.
And I've often shared with folks in my circle about this empty cup that my mother told me to live life with the empty cup. She would say, there should always be room in your cup to receive input from others.
Yeah.
And then she would go on to say that you don't have to drink it all. When you leave them, you can pour it out. But when you're there, you need to at least listen to it. And that concept really has created a lot of value for me as I sit with people and let people fill my cup and then go and filter it out. I don't have to agree with all of it, but it does serve to be an opportunity to let people pour into some of my decisions, some of my thinking.
I'm going to borrow that.
Yeah, the empty cup. Live
I
life.
like it.
Matter of fact, I'm going to send you a cup because I have a cup with that quotation on the
Please
outside.
do.
I'll make sure.
Yeah.
So as we come to a close, I'd like to talk about below the line.
Yeah.
The title of this podcast is Leading Below the Line. And what I mean by that is that oftentimes we as leaders lead from what we see. And there are times there are things, real conflict, real challenges occur below the line. How react to that concept, that thought in your leadership, leading below the line?
So I think that, I almost, in some respects, feel like almost all leadership is below the line, right? So there's almost nothing that we get to, whether it's a decision or an outcome or, a groundbreaking of a new plant, or that there aren't just so much that led into that. And so I think the top above the line is such a small component of of what
That's an
got you
iceberg,
there.
right?
Yeah, it's the iceberg. So, I think that a good leader, from my perspective, and I fall into this all the time or not, is someone who spends 99% of their time below the line.
Okay.
Right? That's where all of it happens. And I think that if you don't invest your time there and your efforts, and you don't have the right people, and you don't invest in them and empower them and make sure that, that, core vision and those values that we talked about earlier are something that they understand and also believe in, you're never going to get to above the line or to the results that you're looking for. So, I think that, they say, like, 90% of life is just showing up. I think, leadership, you have to show up where the work happens, at the right time and in the right ways. And I think that's almost all below the line.
Thank you. So do you have a quote or a mantra that resonates with you?
I like to read, and I used to be a speechwriter. And whenever I wrote speeches, if I got stuck, I'd go read quotes and find some of the things around. There's a lot of them. I guess if we talk about, kind of the theme, I think that Dr. King's quote, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice," is one that I think about a fair amount. And I think it goes back to this idea that if you keep doing the right things and focus on the right things, that ultimately, it may take longer than you might like, or than maybe it should, but ultimately it'll land in the right place. So I try and think about that.
I have one final question for you.
Sure.
Do you have a hero?
Yeah, I don't know that I have one hero. I think that I do like history a lot, and I think that there are people who are maybe not heroes all the time, but show up heroically in matters
Right.
of great importance. I've always admired Winston Churchill, the kind of the leadership uh, that he displayed during the Second World War, and I think if you talk about communicating,
Right.
being clear about your goals and your values, uh, being present, showing up. I think he did all those things. And I think, I don't know that he's a hero of mine as a man, but he was a heroic uh, man in those times. And I have a great deal of admiration for him.
Yeah. It provided very important leadership. Well, Tim, I'm here with Tim Pearson, the president of Duke Energy South Carolina Operations. I'm so honored that you took time to sit with us on Below the Line and to talk about leadership and tell us a little about your story. So thank you so much, Tim.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
The Below the Line podcast is brought to you by the University of South Carolina Upstate. Look for our monthly write-up in Greenville Business Magazine, and for more information, go to uscupstate.edu.